You're listening to Biotech Hangout, a live and unedited weekly discussion of all the latest news in our industry with a group of biotech insiders. I am Eric Schmidt, and my co-hosts today are Brad Loncar, Tim Opler, and Tess Cameron. For more information about our hosts and guest speakers, or to listen to the most recent episode, please go to biotechhangout.com. So thanks everyone for joining. We've been away for a couple weeks and a lot has happened. I think we're going to start off with some of the M&A news in the space. Always welcome to see deal flow on the tape. We had this week, of course, the Merck Verona deal. That was a $10 billion transaction. It actually is the second largest transaction of the year. And then while we were away on holiday, AbbVie brought a private company, Capstan, for $2 billion. And as Daphne Zohar noted to us, this is actually the third takeout in 6 months of a company led by a female CEO. That follows Intracellular and Blueprint Medicines. So congrats to Lawyer Scheuer and the entire biotech sisterhood. Very well done, ladies. Taking a bit of a step upward and looking at where we are almost a little more than 6 months now into the year. By our math, there are now, in terms of M&A deals, as many takeouts thus far in 2025, 18 in total, as we pretty much had in all of 2024, 20 total. And the value of those transactions in 2025 is already eclipsing the total value of deal flow in 2024. There were about $30 billion worth of deals done in 2024 versus over $40 billion now year to date. And we also have three deals of $5 billion plus versus zero in 2025. So I think by most metrics, this year is shaping up to be a very good year for biotech M&A. Again, welcome news anytime you see a transaction. But let's open it up to the team here to discuss whether there's actually something going on that's a little bit more than just by rote chance. Is this a biotech wave, and is there even such a thing as a biotech wave? Who'd like to start on that? Brad?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think the deals that you named, to me, the most interesting one is the Capstan deal because, Verona was priced for a buyout. It's a commercial stage product that's having an awesome launch, and pharma companies have, future revenue gaps to fill. So that's kind of expected. ITCI is another great example of that awesome commercial product, that's doing well. Blueprint, another case of that. Um, what's been missing in action for a long time is companies buying science, so to speak. And that's what, especially people who invest in XDI type stocks, hope to start seeing because that's the vast majority of biotech companies out there. So, um, the Capstan deal, that's an in vivo CAR T company, and they just entered the clinic in January. It's practically a preclinical company. And, we also saw Lilly by Verve about a month ago. And so I think it's a positive sign that you're starting to see pharma companies start to do those types of deals again, where they're buying science for the long term. And so I think if we start seeing more of that, those are the types a Verona is not going to lift like the XBI and make us feel like biotech is back, so to speak. But when you see companies start buying like a gene editing company, well, there's dozens of other gene editing companies out there that might benefit from it. So to me, that's a really positive sign that we're starting to see that.
Tim, what's your take?
I think what we're seeing is expected. So, I've said on a few previous episodes that, there's a lot of latent M&A demand. And what's happened is the Trump tariff moves and also the MFN conversations have just created tremendous uncertainty. And now that that uncertainty has cleared, to some degree, I think pharma's sort of back in business. They were planning on being in business all year, and they're going to be in business for the rest of the year. So we're headed for what I would describe as a normal M&A year. There was really nice article this week in the Financial Times on patent cliffs, and that article just made it clear just how severe the upcoming patent cliffs are. So pharma has no choice. I mean, they've got to go out and do inorganic expansion. And so what we're seeing is, I would describe almost workmanlike steps by AbbVie and Merck and so on to do what they need to do to prepare their companies for the future.
Tess, your thoughts on where we're going with M&A?
Yeah, I think it's really positive to see. I'm kind of with with Brad just about very positive to see that companies are not just looking to fill kind of near-term patent cliffs, right? But also really thinking about like 20, 30 plus, right? And what are the technologies and sources of differentiation that are really going to matter like 20, 30 plus? I think that, Verve and Capstan are both great examples of that.
Brad, I want
Tim,
to Brad, I want to come back to you and Eric. So you've heard what Tess and I have said, sort of how the you know M&A is normal, and we're all starting to go a little bit early. Do you see any changes kind of coming up in M&A patterns? Or is there something that we're looking for that we haven't seen yet?
I mean, I don't know. I don't know what to say to that. I'll pass that one to Eric.
Eric?
oh, that's very kind of both of you. Well, look, I think Brad's right. It would be wonderful to see M&A just for the sake of science. I'm not sure we're going to get there, to be honest. That only happens typically in a very frothy environment, and typically when there's scientific disruption ongoing that seemingly challenges, the normal state of drug development and distribution. But at least I don't know of any science that folks are going to feel like they need to acquire. Though Brad's point about Verve and maybe in vivo cell therapy from Capstan are well taken. I'm just not sure that they're going to be anything more than one-offs. Um, but Tim, I wanted to come back to you on this LOE thing because we have all read some of the same articles, though I missed the Financial Times one that you cited. I've seen statistics that suggest there's something like $150 billion in LOE approaching. And you noted that they don't have any choice. I mean, well, what choices do they really have? And walk us through how you think a pharmaceutical management team considers, potential capital reallocation strategies.
I mean, Eric, maybe I'm cynical. I've been a banker for 30 plus years at this point. And so you just watch organizational behavior year in, year out. And you would like to think that most organizations are focused on maximizing shareholder value. And certainly there's that element of that. But every organization at the board level, the CEO level, and throughout the management has one overriding goal, and that is to survive, right? To live for another day. You don't want to be the CEO that was the last CEO that Bristol Myers ever had, or something like that. And so companies do what they need to do to survive, and survival means keeping your revenue in place, and that means M&A or some type of organic growth. But most companies in our industry don't have enough organic growth to get there.
I mean, maybe something to call out, and Eric, I'd be interested in your thoughts on this. I mean, the premiums for Blueprint and Verona, like they were good, but they were not astounding, right? Um, so just curious. I mean, we'll obviously get more. I think we saw in the 14D9 with between Blueprint and Sanofi, it looked like they were the only bidder. We'll obviously get more, get more information as we get some of the documents out for Verona. But I thought that was interesting and like noteworthy, and it does make me yeah, it made me wonder a little bit, what that means in terms of like just the competition for some of these, commercial stage assets.
That's a great point, Tess. And you could throw in maybe the SpringWorks acquisition into that trend also, a little bit smaller, but not much of a premium. But I think if you go a little bit smaller cap, we have seen some very significant premiums paid for the likes of a Regulus or a Chimerix earlier in the year. Yeah, I guess what we're probably seeing is the market being a little bit maybe more efficient. I mean, Verona certainly is a company that is already up multi-fold in the last 12 months. And the marketplace was pretty good at sniffing out the fact that their drug was selling quite well and likely to be quite substantial. Maybe the same could be said for Blueprint, where the company helped us in putting out some very aspirational long-term guidance that would be hard, I think, to come on top of and pay much of a premium for. And we've all read the documents on SpringWorks, so we kind of know how that's played out as well. But good point. I mean, I do think Brad's view that the XBI would really get a jump if we started seeing more meaningful premiums paid for development stage companies is a good one. Brad, you wanted to add on?
Well, I was just gonna say, uh, congratulations to Capstan, and no offense to them, I was shocked at the buyout price, 2.1 billion. Not to say anything about the quality of their science or anything, but just the valuation again of a very recently clinical company that's being bought for science. Like, if that was a publicly traded stock right now, I just don't, I I I just can't believe that it would be like a multi-billion-dollar situation in the public markets, and I think that says a lot about how challenging the public markets are right now. So to me, that deal um, just was a fantastic sign of big pharma willing to pay a lot for very early stage science. So I'd love to see a lot more of that. And my guess is the fact that it was a private company. I don't know what its private valuation is. I think Tess would know a lot more about that than I do. But I that number blew me away when I saw it. That would not be the case if it was a public company for sure.
I think I said on Biotech Hangout maybe 4 to 6 weeks ago. I don't remember exactly when. That I'm a practicing investment banker, and I'm working on more M&A right now than I ever have. And since that time, the amount of M&A I'm working on has gone up. Um, it's all commercial, so buyers are shopping commercial now, and there's a very simple reason, which is you need revenue, right? And you can buy revenue. There's so many commercial stage companies that got their drug approved that didn't get taken out when they're in phase 2 or phase 3, and so it's a buyer's market. And almost universally, the clients that I'm working with, whether they're on the buy side or the sell side, there's one bidder. So the median number of bidders is one. It's not like six, and that's why the premiums are low. And the reason we're in this market is that the population of targets has just grown so much over the last 3 or 4 years. There's so many commercial stage companies. There's so many biotech companies available. And that reflects the capital that's been pouring into our sector over the last decade. And so it's a very interesting moment for M&A, I'd say.
Those
And
are great
I just
insights, Tim.
I just lastly want to say one last thing about the Verona deal. So Verona is a UK company, and is founded there, and it's kind of become a US company. It's Nasdaq listed, and a lot of the people and all that are here. But it's both. One thing that I think is interesting about it is it's both a mega success for UK life sciences ecosystem, but it's also the age old thing there is right when a company succeeds and hits the big time like they've been doing, it gets bought up and acquired, um and then you're back to square one again. And so it'll be interesting to see how the UK biotech ecosystem both benefits from this, but also if it if it's able to bounce back and have more Veronas and more that are kind of lasting that stay there as cornerstone companies that help the whole ecosystem.
No, great point, Sad, for the UK environment for sure. I want to come back to Tim's comment and insights here as a banker. I mean, this median of one potential buyer per transaction and how that might influence a more modest premium being paid here. Of course, the seller doesn't have to sell, and boards and management teams can choose not to sell for a more modest 20 or 30% premium. Are we seeing any entrenchment on their part? I mean, this has been a market that's been very favorable for companies launching products, and I wouldn't think there'd be, strong need to sell if the premium weren't more substantial.
Most companies get very few offers. So, we advise, as you can imagine, a whole roster of companies. And, you sit down when you get a new client, say, so like, how many times have you been approached in the last decade? And the answer often is never, or maybe once or twice. And so, boards learn that when you get approached, you need to pay attention unless your long-term intention is to, just keep running this company independently. The reality is that most commercial stage pharmaceutical companies don't have enough products, right? So when you look at the P&Ls of these companies, you don't see so many like a Blueprint where the company just is going to go into EBITDA positive territory forever. And so that's really the driver of these acquisitions is typically a company is better off in the hands of a larger organization that can amortize the overhead expenses over more than one product.
Oh, very fair point. Thanks for that discussion, guys. Maybe we'll change gears here and talk about some of the macro stuff that's come out of Washington. When we last sat down for Biotech Hangout, I think there was a lot of uncertainty about whether Trump's big, beautiful bill would even make it through. And last week, of course, things picked up a lot of steam, and that bill was signed on the July 4th holiday. We also had some headlines this week about the reemergence of Trump's thinking on tariffs. So maybe I'm hoping that Brad could introduce the first topic of the big, beautiful bill, which is now law. And Tess might chat with us a little bit about the latest on the tariff front.
Yeah, on the bill, there were a few things that were relevant to our industry, but to me, there was one that was like really stood out, and that's how um, rare disease and orphan drugs are handled through the drug price negotiations from the IRA. Basically, if you had a rare disease drug, if it was only approved for one indication, before this bill, it was exempt from having to go to like drug price negotiations. And as everyone in our industry knows, that depending on what the mechanism is, you might eventually succeed in multiple rare disease indications. And so this rectified that. So now if you have multiple approved indications for like a rare disease type patient population, you're now exempt, which of course is the right thing to do. So that cleaned that up a little bit. And then, the other things like there's uh some uh Medicaid uh spending reductions and some things about how like certain types of hospitals that service lower income communities and patients are handled that may affect our industry. But I think for like drug developers, the biggest thing to know about is that rare disease exemption.
Thank you. And Tess, do you want to handle the tariffs?
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe I'll just make one point on the rare disease exemption. I mean, I think um, certainly positive to know that our representatives were aware that was that the construction of the IRA was creating a disincentive for orphan drug development, especially small molecule orphan drug development, for multi-orphan indications. I think, of course, the a more impactful fix would have been, to really just remove the small molecule penalty and have that be 13 years. I think that my view, at least, is that would have, certainly have more of an impact on drug development, and kind of remove some of these R&D distortions. I mean, yeah, we need drugs that are for multi-orphan conditions. We also want drugs for, more drugs for Alzheimer's and, cardiovascular conditions and heart failure and other things that affect, an elderly patient population that may not benefit from this broad exemption. So it's a good step and a good indication that there's awareness of this issue. In my view, it's certainly better than nothing, but not quite not quite what I would have hoped for in terms of a more permanent fix to what I see as the major challenge with the IRA.
Do you think this makes it more difficult to neutralize the pill penalty in the future, or is that just something that this administration wants to kick back to the latter part of the year and hopefully trade for some other
Yeah.
concession from the industry? Of course, thinking drug pricing.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see, right? I mean, it was clear in the executive order that came out on drug pricing that there's awareness of the distortions of the pill penalty, right? So I think that's positive. That it didn't happen in this in this bill is a bit unfortunate. But yeah, we'll see. I don't know if it necessarily. I mean, it removes one tool, I guess, that was a bill that is moving, for actually getting things done. And maybe it decreases the probability somewhat. But I don't think that I don't think it necessarily changes it drastically over time. And part of the reason for that is it does, give, it does show like an acknowledgement of some of these distortions. So, we'll see if it can come up, if it can come up at a later point.
Okay, maybe continue on with tariffs.
Sure. Yes. So, cabinet meeting last week where Trump brought up tariffs, talked about pharma tariffs, potentially going up to 200%. We're going to give people about a year and a half to come in. After that, they're going to be tariffed if they have to bring the pharmaceuticals into the country, the drugs and other things into the country. So very, lots of, lots of words in that statement. But I think the general idea was okay. Pharma is going to get a tariff if they don't bring manufacturing into the U.S. We've heard a lot of announcements of companies that had the intention of bringing manufacturing into the U.S. 1 to 1.5 years is like that is not enough time to like do tech transfer and move a lot of these processes over to the U.S. So we'll see what actually, comes out of this. There was absolutely no like market move. I mean, there was a market move for like a very, very short period of time that almost instantaneously corrected after this statement. And so my interpretation of that is more the, belief that, hey, it's unlikely that something really serious happens, um, more than, oh, any tariff thing that does come in is like already priced in. I'd be interested in other perspectives of that, but that was very much my view is that the absence of stock move was more a reflection of um, you know the belief that like any ultimate policy was unlikely to be harmful than the belief that such a policy if it happened were would be fine and is kind of already priced in, but would love other perspectives on that.
Yeah, I was also surprised by the market kind of shrugging off not just the tariff headlines, but to some extent the spending bill details too, which did have potential, as Brad noted, to negatively influence the biopharmaceutical industry in terms of a lesser coverage in Medicaid for for healthcare, let alone for pharmaceuticals. But that was a bit of a head scratcher, right? That the markets have been so strong this week. I think while we're giving back a little bit of the strength this morning, we were up nearly 4% through the first 4 days of the week, and we've recovered fully from those April lows, and seem almost like we're breaking out. Maybe all of us who operate in the public markets have been beaten over the head so many times that we just expect that the knee-jerk reaction again to anything coming out of Washington is negative. But perhaps we're just maybe growing a little bit numb to the headlines, and Trump is potentially, I don't know, losing his ability to influence the investment world. I actually hope that's the case. I think we need to naturally mature and navigate to a position where people care a little bit less about, everything our new administration says and our new president says. But I'm not sure we're there yet. Tim, what do you think's going on?
I'll make a few comments, Eric. I think in terms of the overall sort of, upswing or downswing in the market, it is driven very much by fundamentals. And those fundamentals are M&A, right? So we're seeing, a lot of M&A lately. And I think the thesis that this might not be a great M&A year has sort of been disproven at this point. And so that's, I think influential probably to a lot of funds that are on the sidelines that have discretion about where they put their money. But specifically this week, I think there's been a lot more short-term trading that's been impacting our market, and rumors began to circulate in the market the day before yesterday that there were changes coming into the MFN rules. I believe that those rumors are true, but I don't know. I mean, I'm not a Washington insider at all. And so the story that was going around was that the approach to resolving MFN is going to mainly take place through the Medicaid system, Medicare system, and that it will be carrot rather than stick. So that's very good news for our industry. And I don't know how this information gets leaked out of Washington to some fund, but as that information got spread around the various funds that play in the market, you could just see the XBI just kind of popping up hour by hour. And then today, there has not been an announcement on any changes in MFN, but we did see this FDA announcement this morning where FDA kind of came out and said, hey, by the way, if you make your drug more affordable, we may consider granting you a voucher to speed up your approval, which to me was certainly surprising. And I think, some people are like, so is that it? Is that what this MFN thing was? And I think the answer is no. I think there's something else coming, probably going to hit next week.
And I would just add to put all of this in context, like I hate to say this, but strong for us, let's face it, is like a poor man strong. I mean, like the Nasdaq and the S&P are at all-time highs, like all-time ever highs. And the reason we're so excited is because our industry, like 4 months ago, was literally priced for Armageddon. Like we were going away, and like there would be no drug sector, and we're at least like I think some of the excitement is we're starting to feel like some things are normalizing, like M&A is normalizing. Certain drug launches are doing well, even in the context of everyone like bashing us, on pricing and all of this stuff. And so all we're really hoping to go through right now, and it seems like there's green shoots, is that we're being priced from like pure like Armageddon and destruction to something that looks a little more normal, so that at least segments of our industry can invest and run normal businesses.
Well, that's great perspective, Brad. And maybe, before we get too optimistic about the green shoots that you referred to, are there macro or other concerns that folks have that we still need to get past before we can feel truly the ability to breathe easier about biotech's future? Anything you guys are worried about?
I can't. I think Tess said it. I can't remember, but one thing that's important about the tariff issue is that there's going to be a report that's finished at the end of this month. And so there should be good clarity on whether it's positive or negative. The guessing game should get a lot clearer. I don't know if it's going to be released like on the last day of the month, or if like the report was ready and it'll be like weeks later. But there should be a lot more clarity on that, like within like the next 30 to 60 days.
I'll make a comment coming back to the big, beautiful bill, which, for biotech might have been the small, beautiful bill. Um, the the main kind of big picture thing that came out of that bill was we didn't raise taxes, right? So we were on a path for taxes to be raised by schedule. The tax cuts that were put in place in the last Trump administration were extended. So unlike in the Reagan administration, where you saw, huge expansion in the markets after the tax cuts that came in around, 1980, right now we're just kind of preserving the tax rates that we had. If that bill had not passed, which to me seemed like a possibility at times, it could have actually been quite bad in the sense that the markets would not have done so well. And the markets don't do well, that does ultimately feed into risk appetite, which impacts the biotech sector. I do think that despite, some of the damage that the Trump administration's done to our sector, taking down parts of the FDA and so on, that overall there may yet be benefits coming from impacts on the overall market, which we're starting to see. Those impacts will affect risk appetite. Bruce Booth likes to call it, risk on environment. We've definitely not been in a risk on environment. As that happens more and more, we should start to see early stage biotech pick up, but that's a multi-year process.
And Tim, I have to ask you, because I know you've written a lot about the correlation between biotech stock performance and interest rates. Does the big beautiful bill change the way you're thinking about where interest rates are going to be heading in the future? Deficit spending, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, deficit spending is not good for rates at all, and so that's not good for biotech. But the thing that I think we're all watching very carefully are tariffs, and fundamentally, I think Trump views tariffs as a bludgeon to negotiate deals with other countries, and not something that he actually wants to do. In other words, tariffs are not desired by the Republican Party to be at 50%, and so if tariffs went up, that's going to be highly inflationary, most likely, and that would be definitely bad for rates, and that would be definitely bad for biotech. So I'm personally optimistic about the course of inflation, despite the big beautiful bill, and I think that will feed back positively to biotech. But again, this is not like something that happens next week. So the effects of the Reagan expansionary policies on the market took 5 to 10 years to play out. So long term, I think things look really good for our sector. What happens next week, I have no idea.
As you shouldn't. Well, let's shift gears again to the third topic of discussion today, which is the FDA. And there have been a couple now kind of surprise announcements this week. Tim, you just mentioned today's news on potentially trading faster review times for fairer price differential between US and ex-US markets. But really the big surprise, I think, came out a couple days ago, or was it maybe just yesterday, when the FDA released all of these CRLs for products that have since been approved, but received CRLs in the 2020 to 2024 timeframe. Just your overall, well, maybe you could just remind us what happened and give us your thoughts on why the FDA chose to do this.
I mean, it's such an interesting move by the FDA to publish out of the blue, 200 complete response letters, like in a zip file, right? Sort of. I mean, isn't it interesting that the Epstein list got lost this week, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, here's everybody's CRL, and I guess to me, I think we should have transparency about regulatory decision making. That's not a bad thing. But to ex post release everybody's CRLs struck me as very, very odd. And I started reading through the CRLs. I mean, it's pretty interesting reading. A lot of companies were clearly not transparent with the markets as to what was going on. And that's not just little biotechs. I mean, some of these big pharmas were getting CRLs that they never mentioned to the market. So I'd be very curious to hear, Eric, what you think and what Tess and Brad think about this sort of sudden decision to expose industry by releasing all of the CRLs.
I'll jump in real quick and say, first of all, I think it's a positive thing. And one thing I'll say in our hyper uh, politicized and political culture these days, it's not a bad thing to give credit where credit is due if you don't agree with like the politics of somebody and what's going on right now. One thing I will say about this FDA is number one, they are master communicators. Like the difference in communication between this FDA with like the all the videos that they do on social media and all the the tweets and the TV interviews and everything they did, like on a scale of 1 to 10 as communicators, this FDA is like a 9.5. Like whatever you think of the messaging, just as their skill as communicators, they're like 9.5, borderline 10. And I would give the last administration's FDA more like a 4 at best. So like I'll give credit where credit is due there. And then on the CRL issue specifically, a lot of people have brought this up. What they announced and what they put out is what hopefully is a first step, which is they've only made public CRLs for drugs that ultimately ended up getting approved. And that's a good step. So I'm not going to like bash them over the head for like not going all the way with it. Giving them credit for doing this, but the thing that we want as an industry is we want this to change people's behavior. We want this to be designed in a way if you're these small or like you said a big pharma company that's maybe not traditionally been 100% honest in how you've communicated those things. We want this to be designed in a way that people will be that this will change their behavior and make them be a lot more honest. My guess is, especially with the smaller companies, if they just leave it where it is today of like drugs that ultimately get approved, I doubt it will change anything because if you're a small company, you're just desperate to survive and eventually succeed one day down the road. So it would be nice if they start like Capricor got a CRL today for their cell therapy for DMD cardiomyopathy. It would have been amazing to see that CRL today. And maybe if Capricorn knew that that was coming out, maybe or maybe not, obviously it's just a guessing game. We don't know. Maybe it would have changed how they communicate the result of that CRL to the public. So really good first step. Credit where credit is due. And it would be nice if it's just a first step and that this expands and applies to all CRLs in the future.
Tess, what's your take on what's going on at the FDA, either with regard to this initiative or just more broadly? How do you think things are operating there?
Yeah, I mean, I think this initiative definitely very encouraging. As Brad says, I think the more the more the better. Getting the CRLs for unapproved drugs is ultimately what would have a bigger impact, I think, on that behavior. I think that the FDA more broadly look, like we saw, some. I think Stat had a couple of, headlines over this past week about just, some of the internal, turmoil and challenges that staff is experiencing, which sounds really unfortunate, right? I think that the FDA is doing an incredible job, really managing continuing to manage things with a lot of the companies that they're working with. Fortunately, many of the portfolio companies that we talk with, they continue to have constructive interactions. But it's hard for me to think that that's sustainable when I see things like the stat articles that talk about how groups have really been overturned and just how low morale and everything is. So it's I think it's something where we won't really know until we just have more time and understand how some of these FDA like early interactions are playing out as well, right? It's one thing to get drugs approved; it's another thing to respond in a timely way to um, you know uh, briefing books on like end of phase two meetings and pre IND meetings and stuff like that. So I would say generally, it seems like the the FDA is having really constructive engagement with with a lot of companies and really trying to keep things on schedule. I have heard in several instances of just senior reviewers being gone, and so maybe not having the quality of feedback that one might have received in the past, and that's obviously unfortunate. But we'll have to take some more time, and I think companies are going to continue to just work with other regulatory agencies as well, because you can't I don't think we can really have confidence that everything is going to be continue smoothly with the FDA until we have more time, and companies can't afford to take that risk.
Yeah, I'll just pile on to what Brad said earlier. I mean, both Dr. Makari and Dr. Prasad are master communicators. I mean, that's kind of how they got their job, right? They were internet personalities or social media types, and they're extraordinarily well versed in getting out there in front of the media and cameras. Of course, they're part of a administration that features many leaders who know how to communicate through electronic channels. So no surprise there. I guess the big question that I have, and Tess, you touched on that, is what type of managers they are internally. In addition to the Stat News article, there was also an article in BioCentury that reported on a leaked internal memo from Dr. Prasad to his staff. And the good thing about that memo was Dr. Prasad, I think, it, at least is aware enough to know that he may have some issues with regard to staffing and turnover and morale. And he's trying to address those issues by communicating his urgency in hiring new review staff members, and also trying to create an open environment where conflict is able to be brought forth and communication internally is stressed. So I almost got the sense from reading that BioCentury article that Dr. Prasad has a good sense of what isn't going well at the agency right now, and maybe he's focusing some of his efforts more internally as opposed to externally, which might not be a bad thing, in order to try and head some of that stuff off before it really becomes a problem for our industry. But in terms of a problem for industry, we did have this very unfortunate case of Capricor, Brad, that you referenced, and maybe just want to walk through our listeners on what has happened with regard to Capricor's NDA that was BLA that was filed now a few months ago and got the CRL today.
Is this for me?
If you don't mind, I know you're on it.
Sure. Well, I'm kind of not. So I guess I'll give it a shot. So this is a cell therapy for we're very we commonly talk about DMD and we think of like the Sareptas of the world. This is a little different. So this is cell therapy, and the indication that they're going after is very in for this approval is very specific. It's cardiomyopathy related to DMD. And I actually don't know enough about the history of it, other than to know, like, obviously got the CRL because, like, the data was, like, marginal going into this. And the other thing that's a really key element here, and maybe makes this decision the right thing to do, is they have the same therapy in a key trial for a slightly different indication within DMD, and a big trial that's going to read out like any day now. Like I think it's scheduled for August or September. And even though it's not for cardiomyopathy, it's I think it's more of like a traditional muscle strength indication. It'll give us maybe a better view into like whether this therapy and this whole cell therapy approach that they have actually works or not. So this is not a situation where it's like an accelerated approval and we're not going to know like for years and years about like a follow-up study like that's like confirmatory. Like we're going to know a lot more about this exact same therapy within like the next 30 days. And so the the big controversy is the head of I'm drawing a blank on her name, but
Nicole
the late,
Verdun.
yeah, she had scheduled an adcom for this. I think around like this time. This, by the way, the decision date for this was August 31st, so the CRL actually came a little early. But the reporting that had been in the news, I think Stat News was like Adam was the main person who kind of dug this up. Is based off of his reporting, what he was saying is that Vinay was really not a believer in this, and part of what led to her departure was he like scrapped the adcom and was like, "There's no way we're approving this," like based off of the the this indication and the existing data that they have. So that's pretty much all I know about it. I'm sure that's a small fraction of like all the details of the story, but that's my impression. But I think we'll know a lot more about this in a month or two, and I think it's probably what little I know about it. I actually think this makes sense. Like if there's some huge trial readout that's going to give us a clearer picture into the utility of this therapy in like a month or two, why go out on a limb based off of what appears to be thinner data on some approval right now when you'll know more about it in a couple of months?
Brad, I'll add, just reading the press release that the company put out this morning, it is kind of interesting reading, right? Because the company says, hey, we had a mid-cycle review and everything was fine. And now they tell us that we have not met the statutory requirement for efficacy. I mean, I'm kind of on the FDA side here. I'm not saying that they made the right or wrong decision. I don't know the specific facts, but shouldn't the FDA have the right to read all the evidence and then, at some point make a decision? So just because the mid-cycle meeting seemed to be okay doesn't mean that you're going to get an approval. And so I just thought that the implication in the press release that somehow the FDA wasn't like straight with the company seemed to be a little bit off to me.
I, I agree with that, Tim. And another thing that I think like should change about the FDA is just the rigid calendaring of everything. And like another good example, like if you look back, and especially now that like we've had controversy about it. So like sticking with DMD, think of Sarepta's um gene editing program. So remember, it got accelerated approval. I'm sure I'll have my dates slightly wrong, but it got accelerated approval like in the summer, and it had a big confirmatory trial readout scheduled for like 7 months, like less than 6 months later. And if you didn't have to worry about, well, they filed on this date, so the decision has to be by this date, and like all of this stuff, like you would think a rational person, if you weren't confined to all of those rules and regulations, would say, should we give this an approval and then 6 months later find out whether this other, this key follow-up study has succeeded or not? Like the right thing to do is let's just like decide on all of this once we have the totality of the data in front of us. But in those types of situations, you have to follow these, PDUFA rules, and I don't think that serves medicine as well as it should. And it sounds to me, again, what little I know about it, that this Capricor situation is a very similar thing. They filed this thing, they had to get a decision by such and such date, and they were going to have this key data a month later. Well, a rational person would say, let's just wait until we see what that data looks like. And that sounds like exactly what the FDA did in this case.
Brad, I'm glad I put you on the spot because you certainly know a lot more about this than you admitted. And I think all your points are very valid. But the one beef the company does seem to have, and this came out on their call earlier today, is that they, in their opinion, have kind of been dealing with two FDAs, two sequential review staffs. When it was Nicole Verdun and her team, everything was hunky-dory. They were moving toward an approval. They had that mid-cycle review staff meeting, and things were fine. And the FDA had accepted their statistical plan and analyses, even though part of that was post hoc. Obviously, Nicole was dismissed. The Stat News article came out as to why. And as of today, it seems like they're dealing with a very different FDA, one that is being directed by Dr. Prasad, who obviously has taken issue with the circumstances that we find ourselves in. Maybe they're to no one's fault, I don't know. but I think it is, a little bit unfair that the companies had to go through this turmoil in staff and turnover in staff, and has had to deal with the consequences of it. But Tess, any thoughts here? It's certainly a controversial matter.
Nothing I have to add. I think very thorough discussion.
Okay. Well, hopefully, again, as you laid out earlier, Tess, the FDA can sort of right the ship and make sure that things are moving in the right direction. We still are obviously in a very tumultuous situation with regard to the status of this agency. So maybe we should add the FDA to another potential future risk that we're not quite sure we've got clean sailing on just yet. Let's move to some better topics. We did have some good news both on the approval front and then some good data sets that were reported today too. Brad, do you want to handle the KalVista approval for HAE?
Yeah, and of course, there's a whole underlying FDA saga with that one too. And I may just, especially for time, just skip that part of it. But this is an oral kallikrein inhibitor for HAE attacks, and it's the first ever oral drug, period, for HAE attacks. There's IV drugs, and there's injected drugs, and now this, seems like a really convenient thing. So credit to them for getting it across the finish line, and the science that they like the way they design these molecules in order to achieve this. Obviously, they're not the first to have the idea of having an oral therapy. Was pretty elegant in how they were able to design this and succeed. The drug is called Ekterly. I thought there's like a interesting backstory behind the name. It's supposed to uh, stand for act early. So if you're, an HAE, um, if you have that genetic condition and, you want to, if you're starting to see initial signs of attack, you want to act early and get it done as soon as possible. One thing that I think is interesting about this story, and it also is like, is are the economics of our industry like ideal? So this therapy, it's like 16, it's priced per dose. It's like 16,700 is the list price, like per pill. And my own personal like editorial on this is I think that puts patients in a tricky situation because if you're like, do I like every time I swallow a pill, it's like somebody has to pay $17,000. You might use it a lot less, or you might think twice about using something in a scenario where if it was a lot less than that, it'd be an easier decision. So one thing I wonder over the very long term, I think that CalVista had to price it this way because that's how payers deal with these things today. But I think it'd be interesting if a company like that in the future is somehow able to have like a subscription model, where you maybe pay an annual fee, and whether you need to take one pill or you need to take a few a month, and you don't have to worry about the financial consequences of something like that where it's like an emergency attack type situation rather than like a chronic disease.
Couldn't agree with you more, Brad. I feel like for, you know, PRN drugs, right? Several of these, um, for diseases like that, I couldn't agree with you more. I think a model like that is really the right way to think about it.
And Tess, would you like to walk us through the kind of wild week that ProKidney has had?
My goodness. I mean, yes. So I think, so maybe let's start with just what ProKidney is developing. So ProKidney is developing a cell therapy, rilparin cell, and this is a cell therapy that they've been developing, and they shared an update on their phase two, where they essentially were comparing, they had two groups that got, slightly different, injection schedules for, this cell therapy. And these were, these were patients who have chronic kidney disease, right? Chronic kidney disease, really, really challenging indication to treat, right? Not a whole lot of drugs that have been successful in actually treating chronic kidney disease. So what they showed is essentially with these, two different dosing schedules. This was an open label study, and they looked at the eGFR slope before the study, and then they said, okay, let's look at the, eGFR slope after the last injection. And what they saw is they saw an improvement, pre-injection versus post-injection in eGFR slope. And for one of the groups in particular, the group that received 2 injections, they saw a more kind of dramatic change in eGFR function, eGFR slope, pre-injection versus post-injection. So how do we know this matters? Well, what ProKidney is doing is they are, also in a phase 3 study that is a randomized study where they are, where they're looking at this, cell therapy, and that could be the basis for approval. And I think that's expected to read out, at some point in 2026. And so, I think there was a very positive, stock response. The stock has gone from like 61 cents before these data to now being at, almost $5 a share, right? Companies at over 1.5 billion, market capitalization on these data. So it's another reminder that, with biotech stocks, it doesn't really matter what you were trading at before. It really is just a function of like, what are your data, and investors will kind of bid you up to what they think that, that data means in terms of, what your drug might be worth. Still, like there's a lot of debates, I would say, about what these phase 2 data mean, and how they should be interpreted. I think questions are like, well, hey, this was open label, so how would this look compared to placebo? How about SGLT2 use? There's a lot of nuances around like the timing of follow-up, timing of when injections were given, that I think we'll need to have some more information on, and we'll ultimately really find out in the phase 3.
Thank you for that excellent recap. Tim, you get the last word. I know you've been thinking a lot about obesity post the ADA meeting a couple weeks back.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of a long time after the meeting, but I did work on a report which we put out this week, and just kind of talking about the obesity market. I would say that, when you really contemplate where Lilly is, they have a quite a formidable portfolio. So it was a surprise to me to see how strong their amylin was. It was a surprise to me to see how strong their muscle drug was. So all of a sudden, Lilly has a strong oral, strong amylin, strong muscle drug. Obviously, they have retatrutide coming in. And so when you start to look at all of the competition, what all of these biotechs and other large pharmas have in obesity, I think it's going to be much tougher for them to compete against Lilly. And there's another thing coming up, which is semaglutide is going to be generic, presumably sometime around 2030. We don't know exactly when. And so, generic semaglutide is going to be very inexpensive, and that drug works quite well. So the kind of the key point I made in the report was that this market is a little bit less open than it's seen before. I do think that there are some companies that look good. I like Corxel, I like Kylera. Those are companies that have assets that could specifically compete against, Lilly's best asset in that category. But just quite interesting to see how quickly this market has matured.
Fascinating stuff, and congrats on another terrific report. Tess, Tim, Brad, we're out of time, but thank you all for sharing your insights. Thank our listeners for joining us too, and we'll see you all next week.